11. Dread Accusation. That night, torches lighted the banquet hall with a smoky glare. Fires burned on round hearths between the pillars, which were hung with shields and the ensigns of many ships. The whole vast room was hollowed out of the living rock, with galleries that gave upon the sea. Long tables were set out. Servants ran among them with flagons of wine and smoking joints fresh from the fires. Kars had nobly followed the lead of Ironbeard all afternoon, and to a somewhat unsteady sight, it seemed that all of Condor was feasting there to the wild music of harps and the singing of the skalds. He sat with the sea kings and the leaders of the swimmers and the skyfolk on the raised dais at the north end of the hall. Owain was there also. They had made her stand, and she had remained motionless for hours, giving no sign of weakness, her head still high. Kars admired her. He liked it in her that she was still the proud Owain. Around the curving wall had been set the figureheads of ships taken in war, so that Kars felt surrounded by shadowy looming monsters that quivered on the brink of life, with the torchlight picking glints from a jeweled eye or a gilded talon, momentarily lighting a carven face half ripped away by a ram. Amer was nowhere in the hall. Kars's head rang with the wine and the talking, and there was a mounting excitement in him. He fondled the hilt of the sword of Rhiannon where it lay between his knees. Presently, it would be time. Rold set his drinking horn down with a bang. "Now," he said, "let's get to business." He was a trifle thick-tongued, as they all were, but fully in command of himself. "And the business, my lords? Why, a very pleasant one." He laughed. "One we've thought on for a long time, all of us. The death of Owain of Sark." Kars stiffened. He had been expecting that. "Wait! She's my captive!" They all cheered him at that, and drank his health again, all except Thorn of Tarok, the man with the useless arm and the twisted cheek, who had sat silent all evening, drinking steadily, but not getting drunk. "Of course," said Rold. "Therefore the choice is yours." He turned to look at Owain with pleasant speculation. "How shall she die?" "Die?" Kars got to his feet. "What is this talk of Owain dying?" They stared at him rather stupidly, too astonished for the moment to believe that they had heard him right. Owain smiled grimly. "But why else did you bring her here?" demanded Ironbeard. "The sword is too clean a death, or you would have slain her on the galley. Surely you gave her to us for our vengeance." "I have not given her to anyone," Kars shouted. "I say she is mine, and I say she is not to be killed." There was a stunned pause. Owain's eyes met the Earthman's, bright with mockery. Then Thorn of Tarok said one word. "Why?" He was looking straight at Kars now, with his dark, mad eyes, and the Earthman found his question hard to answer. "Because her life is worth too much as a hostage. Are you babes, that you can't see that? Why, you could buy the release of every Khan's slave, perhaps even bring Sark to terms." Thorn laughed. It was not a pleasant laughter. The leader of the swimmers said, "My people would not have it so." "Nor mine," said the winged man. "Nor mine." Rold was on his feet now, flushed with anger. "You're an outlander, Kars. Perhaps you don't understand how things are with us." "No," said Thorn of Tarok softly. "Give her back. She that learned kindness at Garrett's knee, and drank wisdom from the teachers of Caer-Du. Set her free again to mark others with her blessing, as she marked me when she burned my longship. His eyes burned into the Earthman. "Let her live, because the barbarian loves her." Kars stared at him. He knew vaguely that the Sea Kings tensed forward, watching him. The 9 chiefs of war with the eyes of tigers, their hands already on their sword hilts. He knew that Owain's lips curved, as though at some private jest. And he burst out laughing. He roared with it. "Look you!" he cried, and turned his back so that they might see the scars of the lash. "Is that a love note Owain has written on my hide? And if it were, it was no song of passion the Duvian was singing me when I slew him." He swung around again, hot with wine, flushed with the power he knew he had over them. "Let any man of you say that again, and I'll take the head from his shoulders. Look at you, great nidderlings, quarreling over a wench's life. Why don't you gather, all of you, and make an assault on Sark?" There was a great clatter and scraping of feet as they rose, howling at him in their rage at his impudence. Bearded shins thrust forward, knotty fists hammering on the board. "What do you take yourself for, you pup of the sandhills?" Rold shouted. "Have you never heard of the Duvians and their weapons, who are Sark's allies? How many Khans do you think have died these long years past, trying to face those weapons?" "But suppose," asked Kars, "you had weapons of your own?" Something in his voice penetrated even to Rold, who scowled at him. "If you have a meaning, speak it plainly." "Sark could not stand against you," Kars said, "if you had the weapons of Rhiannon." Ironbeard snorted. "Oh, aye, the cursed one. Find his tomb and the powers in it, and we'll follow you to Sark fast enough." "Then you have pledged yourselves," Kars said, and held the sword aloft. "Look there! Look well! Does any man among you know enough to recognize this blade?" Thorn of Tarik reached out his one good hand and drew the sword closer that he might study it. Then his hand began to tremble. He looked up at the others and said in a strange, awed voice, "It is the sword of Rhiannon." A harsh sibilance of indrawn breath, and then Kars spoke. "There is my proof. I hold the secret of the tomb." Silence. Then a guttural sound from Ironbeard, and after that, mounting wild excitement that burst and spread like flame. "He knows the secret! By gods, he knows!" "Would you face the Duvian weapons if you had the greater powers of Rhiannon?" Kars asked. There was such a crazy clamor of excitement that it took moments for Rold's voice to be heard. The tall Khan's face was half doubtful. "Could we use Rhiannon's weapons of power, if we had them? We can't even understand the Duvian weapons you captured in the galley." "Give me time to study and test them, and I'll solve the way of using Rhiannon's instruments of power," Kars replied confidently. He was sure that he could. It would take time, but he was sure that his own knowledge of science was sufficient to decipher the operation of at least some of those weapons of an alien science. He swung the great sword high, glittering in the red light of the torches, and his voice rang out. "And if I arm you thus, will you make good your word? Will you follow me to Sark?" All doubts were swept away by the challenge, by the heaven-sent opportunity to strike at last at Sark on at least even terms. The answer of the Sea Kings roared out, "We'll follow!" It was then that Kars saw Amer. She had come onto the dais by some inner passage, standing now between 2 brooding giant figureheads crusted with the memory of the sea, and her eyes were fixed on Kars, wide and full of horror. Something about her compelled them, even in that moment, to turn and stare. She stepped out into the open space above the table. She wore only a loose white robe, and her hair was unbound. It was as though she had just risen from sleep and was walking still in the midst of a dream. But it was an evil dream. The weight of it crushed her, so that her steps were slow and her breathing labored, and even these fighting men felt the touch of it on their own hearts. Emer spoke, and her words were very clear and measured. I saw this before, when the stranger first came before me, but my strength failed me, and I could not speak. Now I shall tell you. You must destroy this man. He is danger. He is darkness. He is death for us all. Owain stiffened, her eyes narrowing. Kars felt her glance on him, intense with interest. But his attention was all on Emer. As on the key, he was filled with a strange terror that had nothing to do with ordinary fear. An unexplainable dread of this girl's strong extrasensory powers. Rold broke in, and Kars got a grip on himself. Fool, he thought, to be upset by woman's talk, woman's imaginings. The secret of the tomb, Rold was saying. Did you not hear? He can give us the power of Rhiannon. Aye, said Emer soberly. I heard, and I believe. He knows well the hidden place of the tomb, and he knows the weapons that are there. She moved closer, looking up at Kars where he stood in the torchlight, the sword in his hands. She spoke directly now to him. Why should you not know, who have brooded there so long in the darkness? Why should you not know, who made those powers of evil with your own hands? Was it the heat and the wine that made the rock walls reel and put the cold sickness in his belly? He tried to speak, and only a hoarse sound came, without words. Emer's voice went on, relentless, terrible. Why should you not know? You who are the cursed one, Rhiannon! The rock walls gave back the word like a whispered curse, until the hall was filled with the ghostly name Rhiannon. It seemed to Kars that the very shields rang with it, and the banners trembled. And still the girl stood unmoving, challenging him to speak, and his tongue was dead and dry in his mouth. They stared at him, all of them, Owain and the Sea Kings and the feasters silent amid the spilled wine and the forgotten banquet. It was as though he were Lucifer, fallen, crowned with all the wickedness of the world. Then Owain laughed, a sound with an odd note of triumph in it. So that is why. I see it now. Why you called upon the Cursed One in the cabin there, when you stood against the power of Caer-Du that no man can resist, and slew Sasan. Her voice rang out mockingly. Hail, Lord Rhiannon! That broke the spell. Kars said, You lying vixen! You salve your pride with that. No mere man could down Owain of Sark, but a god? That's different. He shouted at them all. Are you fools, or children, that you listen to such madness? You, there, Jaxart, you toiled beside me at the oar. Does a god bleed under the lash like a common slave? Jaxart said slowly, That first night in the galley, I heard you cry Rhiannon's name. Kars swore. He rounded on the Sea Kings. You're warriors, not serving maids. Use your wits. Has my body mouldered in a tomb for ages? Am I a dead thing walking? Out of the tail of his eyes he saw Bagaz moving toward the dais, and here and there the drunken devils of the galley's crew were rising also, loosening their swords to rally him. Rold put his hands on Emer's shoulders and said sternly, What say you to this, my sister? I have not spoken of the body, Emer answered, only of the mind. The mind of the mighty cursed one could live on and on. It did live, and now it has somehow entered into this barbarian, dwelling there as a snail lies curled within its shell. She turned again to Kars. In yourself, you are alien and strange. For that alone I would fear you, because I do not understand. But for that alone I would not wish you dead. But I say that Rhiannon watches through your eyes and speaks with your tongue. That in your hands are his sword and scepter, and therefore I ask your death. Kars said harshly, Will you listen to this crazy child? But he saw the deep doubt in their faces. The superstitious fools. There was real danger here. Kars looked at his gathering men, figuring his chances of fighting clear if he had to. He mentally cursed the yellow-haired witch who had spoken this incredible, impossible madness. Madness, yes. And yet the quivering fear in his own heart had crystallized into a single stabbing shaft. If I were possessed, he snarled, would I not be the first to know? Would I not? Echoed the question in Kars's brain. And memories came rushing back. The nightmare darkness of the tomb, when he had seemed to feel an eager alien presence, and the dreams and the half-remembered knowledge that was not his own. It was not true. It could not be true. He would not let it be true. Bagaz came up onto the dais. He gave Kars one queer, shrewd glance, but when he spoke to the Sea Kings, his manner was smoothly diplomatic. No doubt the Lady Emer has wisdom far beyond mine, and I mean her no disrespect. However, the barbarian is my friend, and I speak from my own knowledge. He is what he says, no more and no less. The men of the galley crew growled a warning assent to that. Bagaz continued, Consider, my lords, would Rhiannon slay a Duvian and make war on the Sox? Would he offer victory to Condor? No, said Ironbeard. By the gods, he wouldn't. He was all for the serpent spawn. Emer spoke, demanding their attention. My lords, have I ever lied or advised you wrongly? They shook their heads, and Rold said, No, but your word is not enough in this. Very well. Forget my words. There is a way to prove whether or not he is Rhiannon. Let him pass the testing before the wise ones. Rold pulled at his beard, scowling. Then he nodded. Wisely said. He agreed, and the others joined in. Aye, let it be proved. Rold turned to Kars. You will submit? No, Kars answered furiously. I will not. To the devil with all such superstitious flummery. If my offer of the tomb isn't enough to convince you of where I stand, why, you can do without it, and without me. Rold's face hardened. No harm will come to you. If you're not Rhiannon, you have nothing to fear. Again, will you submit? No! He began to strike back along the table toward his men, who were already bunched together like wolves snarling for a fight. But Thorn of Tarik caught his ankle as he passed and brought him down, and the men of Condor swarmed over the galley's crew, disarming them before blood was shed. Kars struggled like a wildcat among the Sea Kings, in a brief passion of fury that lasted until Ironbeard struck him regretfully on the head with a brass-bound drinking horn. 12. The Cursed One. The darkness lifted slowly. Kars was conscious first of sounds, the suck and sigh of water close at hand, the muffled roaring of surf beyond a wall of rock. Otherwise, it was still and heavy. Light came next, a suffused, soft glow. When he opened his eyes, he saw high above him a rift of stars, and below that was arching rock, crusted with crystalline deposits that gave back a gentle gleaming. He was in a sea cave, a grotto floored with a pool of milky flame. As his sight cleared, he saw that there was a ledge on the opposite side of the pool, with steps leading down from above. The Sea King stood there, with shackled Owain and Bagaz and the chief men of the swimmers and the sky folk. All watched him, and none spoke. Karst found that he was bound upright to a thin spire of rock, quite alone. Emer stood before him, waist deep in the pool. The black pearl gleamed between her breasts, and the bright water ran like a spilling of diamonds from her hair. In her hand she held a great rough jewel, dull gray in color and cloudy as though it slept. When she saw that his eyes were open, she said clearly, "Oh, my masters, it is time." A regretful sigh murmured through the grotto. The surface of the pool was disturbed with a trembling of phosphorescence, and the waters parted smoothly as three shapes swam slowly to Emer's side. They were the heads of three swimmers, white with age. Their eyes were the most awful things that Karst had ever seen, for they were young with an alien sort of youth that was not of the body, and in them was a wisdom and a strength that frightened him. He strained against his bonds, still half dazed from Ironbeard's blow, and he heard above him a rustling as of great birds roused from slumber. Looking up, he saw on the shadowy ledges three brooding figures, the old eagles of the sky folk with tired wings, and in their faces too was the light of wisdom divorced from flesh. He found his tongue then. He raged and struggled to be free, and his voice had a hollow, empty sound in the quiet vault. And they did not answer, and his bonds were tight. He realized at last that it was no use. He leaned breathless and shaken against the spire of rock. A harsh, cracked whisper came then from the ledge above. "Little sister, lift up the stone of thought." Emer raised the cloudy jewel in her hands. It was an eerie thing to watch. Karst did not understand at first. Then he saw that as the eyes of Emer and the wise ones grew dim and veiled, the cloudy gray of the jewel cleared and brightened. It seemed that all of the power of their minds was pouring into the focal point of the crystal, blending through it into one strong beam, and he felt the pressure of those gathered minds upon his own mind. Karst sensed dimly what they were doing. The thoughts of the conscious mind were a tiny electric pulsation through the neurons. That electric pulse could be dampened, neutralized, by a stronger counter-impulse, such as they were focusing on him through that electrosensitive crystal. They themselves could not know the basic science behind their attack upon his mind. These halflings, strong in extrasensory powers, had perhaps long ago discovered that the crystals could focus their minds together, and had used the discovery without ever knowing its scientific basis. "But I can hold them off," Karst whispered thickly to himself. "I can hold them all off." It enraged him, that calm, impersonal beating down of his mind. He fought it with all the force within him, but it was not enough. And then, as before, when he had faced the singing stars of the Duvian, some force in him that did not seem his own came to aid him. It built a barrier against the wise ones and held it until Karst moaned in agony. Sweat ran down his face and his body writhed, and he knew dimly that he was going to die, that he couldn't stand any more. His mind was like a closed room that is suddenly burst open by contending winds that turn over the piled-up memories and shake the dusty dreams and reveal everything, even in the darkest corners. All except one. One place where the shadow was solid and impenetrable and would not be dispersed. The jewel blazed between Amer's hands, and there was a stillness like the silence in the spaces between the stars. Amer's voice rang clear across it. "Rhiannon! Speak!" The dark shadow that Karsfeld layered in his mind quivered, stirred, but gave no other sign. He felt that it waited and watched. The silence pulsed. Across the pool, the watchers on the ledge moved uneasily. Bagaz's voice came querulously. "It is madness! How can this barbarian be the cursed one of long ago?" But Amer paid no heed, and the jewel in her hand blazed higher and higher. "The wise ones have strength, Rhiannon. They can break this man's mind. They will break it, unless you speak." And savagely triumphant now, "What will you do then? Creep into another man's brain and body? You cannot, Rhiannon, for you would have done so ere now, if you could." Across the pool, Ironbeard said hoarsely, "I do not like this." But Amer went mercilessly on, and now her voice seemed the only thing in Kars's universe, relentless, terrible. "The man's mind is cracking, Rhiannon. A minute more, and your only instrument becomes a helpless idiot. Speak now, if you would save him." Her voice rang and echoed from the vaulting rock of the cavern, and the jewel in her hands was a living flame of force. Kars felt the agony that convulsed that crouching shadow in his mind. Agony of doubt, of fear. And then suddenly that dark shadow seemed to explode through all Kars's brain and body, to possess him utterly in every atom. And he heard his own voice, alien in tone and timbre, shouting, "Let the man's mind live. I will speak." The thunderous echoes of that terrible cry died slowly, and in the pregnant hush that followed, Amer gave back one step and then another, as though her very flesh recoiled. The jewel in her hands dimmed suddenly. Fiery ripples broke and fled as the swimmers shrank away, and the wings of the sky folk clashed against the rock. In the eyes of all of them was the light of realization and of fear. From the rigid figures that watched across the water, from Rold and the Sea Kings, came a shivering sign that was a name. "Rhiannon, the Cursed One!" It came to Kars that even Amer, who had dared to force into the open the hidden thing she had sensed in his mind, was afraid of the thing now that she had evoked it. And he, Matthew Kars, was afraid. He had known fear before, but even the terror he had felt when he faced the Duvian was as nothing to this blind, shuddering agony. Dreams, illusions, the figments of an obsessed mind. He had tried to believe that that was what these hints of strangeness were. But not now. Not now. He knew the truth, and it was a terrible thing to know. "It proves nothing," Bagaz was wailing insistently. "You have hypnotized him, made him admit the impossible." "It is Rhiannon," whispered one of the swimmers. She raised her white-furred shoulders from the water, her ancient hands lifted. "It is Rhiannon in the stranger's body." And then, in a chilling cry, "Kill the man before the Cursed One uses him to destroy us all!" A hellish clamor broke instantly from the echoing walls, as an ancient dread screamed from human and halfling throats. Kill him! Kill! Kars, helpless himself, but one in feeling with the dark thing within him, felt that dark one's wild anxiety. He heard the ringing voice that was not his own shouting above the clamor. Wait! You are afraid because I am Rhiannon, but I have not come back to harm you. Why have you come back then? Whispered Emer. She was looking into Kars's face, and by her dilated eyes, Kars knew that his face must be strange and awful to look upon. Through Kars's lips, Rhiannon answered, I have come to redeem my sin. I swear it. Emer's white, shaken face flashed burning hate. Oh, father of lies! Rhiannon, who brought evil on our world by giving the serpent power, who was condemned and punished for his crime. Rhiannon, the cursed one, turned saint. She laughed, a bitter laughter born of hate and fear that was picked up by the swimmers in the skyfold. For your own sake, you must believe me, raged the voice of Rhiannon. Will you not ever listen? Kars felt the passion of the dark being who had used him in this unholy fashion. He was one with that alien heart that was violent and bitter, and yet lonely. Lonely as no other could understand the word. Listen to Rhiannon? Cried Emer. Did the Quiru listen long ago? They judged you for your sin. Will you deny me the chance to redeem myself? The Cursed One's tone was almost pleading. Can you not understand that this man Kars is my only chance to undo what I did? His voice rushed on, urgent, eager. For an age, I lay fixed and frozen in an imprisonment that not even the pride of Rhiannon could withstand. I realized my sin. I wished to undo it, but could not. Then into my tomb and prison from outside came this man Kars. I fitted the immaterial electric web of my mind into his brain. I could not dominate him, for his brain was alien and different. But I could influence him a little, and I thought that I could act through him. For his body was not bound in that place. In him, my mind, at least, could leave it. And in him, I left it, not daring to let even him know that I was within his brain. I thought that through him I might find a way to crush the serpent whom I raised from the dust to my sorrow long ago. Rold's shaking voice cut across the passionate pleading that came from Kars's lips. There was a wild look on the Khan's face. Emer, let the Cursed One speak no longer. Lift the spell of your minds from the man. Lift the spell, echoed Ironbeard hoarsely. Yes, whispered Emer. Yes. Once again the jewel was raised, and now the wise ones gathered all their strength, spurred by the terror that was on them. The electro-sensitive crystal blazed, and it seemed to Kars like balefire searing in his mind. For Rhiannon fought against it, fought with the desperation of madness. You must listen! You must believe! No, said Emer. Be silent! Release the man, or he will die! One last wild protest, broken short by the iron purpose of the wise ones. A moment of hesitation, a stab of pain too deep for human understanding, and then the barrier was gone. The alien presence, the unholy sharing of the flesh, were gone, and the mind of Matthew Kars closed over the shadow and hid it. The voice of Rhiannon was stilled. Like a dead man, Kars sagged against his bonds. The light went out of the crystal. Emer let her hands fall. Her head bent forward so that her bright hair veiled her face, and the wise ones covered their faces also, and remained motionless. The sea kings, Owain, even Bagaz, were held speechless, like men who have narrowly escaped destruction and only realized later how close to death has come. Kars moaned once. For a long time, that and his harsh gasping breath were the only sounds. Then Amer said, "The man must die." There was nothing in her now but weariness and a grim truth. Kars heard dimly Rold's heavy answer, "Aye, there is no other way." Bagaz would have spoken, but they silenced him. Kars said thickly, "It isn't true. Such things can't be." The mare raised her head and looked at him. Her attitude had changed. She seemed to have no fear of Kars himself, only pity for him. "Yet you know that it is true." Kars was silent. He knew. "You have done no wrong, stranger," she said. "In your mind I saw many things that are strange to me, much that I cannot understand, but there was no evil there. Yet Rhiannon lives in you, and we dare not let him live." "But he can't control me." Kars made an effort to stand, lifting his head so that he should be heard, for his voice was drained of strength like his body. "You heard him admit that himself. He cannot dominate me. My will is my own." Owain said slowly, "What of Sasan and the sword? It was not the mind of Kos the barbarian that controlled you then." "He cannot master you," said Amer, "except when the barriers of your own mind weaken under stress. Great fear or pain or weariness, perhaps even the unconsciousness of sleep or wine, might give the cursed one his chance, and then it would be too late." Rold said, "We dare not take the risk." "But I can give you the secret of Rhiannon's tomb," cried Kars. He saw that thought begin to work in their minds. Then he went on, the ghastly unfairness of the whole thing acting as a spur. "Do you call this justice? You men of Condor who cry out against the Sarks? Will you condemn me when you know I'm innocent? Are you such cowards that you'll doom your people to live forever under the dragon's claws because of a shadow out of the past? Let me lead you to the tomb. Let me give you victory. That will prove I have no part with Rhiannon." Bagaz's mouth fell open in horror. "No, Kos, no! Don't give it to them!" Rold shouted, "Silence!" Ironbeard laughed grimly. "Let the cursed one lay his hands upon his weapons? That would be madness indeed." "Very well," said Kars. "Let Rold go. I'll map the way for him. Keep me here. Guard me. That should be safe enough. You can kill me swiftly if Rhiannon takes control of me." He caught them with that. The only thing greater than their hate and dread of the Cursed One was their burning desire for the legendary weapons of power that might in time mean victory and freedom for Condor. They pondered, doubtful, hesitating. But he knew their decision even before Rold turned and said, "We accept, Kos. It would be safer to slay you out of hand, but we need those weapons." Kars felt the cold presence of imminent death withdraw a little. He warned, "It won't be easy. The tomb is near Jakara." Ironbeard asked, "What of Owain?" "Death, and at once," said Thorn of Tarak harshly. Owain stood silent, looking at them all with cool, careless unconcern. But Amer interposed, Rold goes into danger. Until he returns safely, let Owain be kept, in case we need a hostage for him." It was only now that Carr saw Bagaz in the shadows, shaking his head in misery, tears running down his fat cheeks. "He gives them a secret worth a kingdom," wailed Bagaz. "I have been robbed." 13. Catastrophe. The days that followed after that were long, strange days for Matthew Carse. He drew a map from memory of the hills above Jakara and the place of the tomb, and Rold studied it until he knew it as he knew his own courtyard. Then the parchment was burned. Rold took one longship and a picked crew, and left Condor by night. Jaxart went with him. Everyone knew the dangers of that voyage. But one swift ship, with swimmers to scout the way, might elude the Sark patrols. They would beach in a hidden cove Jaxart knew of, west of Jakara, and go the rest of the way overland. "If aught goes wrong on the return," Rold said grimly, "we'll sink our ship at once." After the long ship sailed, there was nothing to do but wait. Carse was never alone. He was given 3 small rooms in a disused part of the palace, and guards were with him always. A corroding fear crept in his mind, no matter how he fought it down. He caught himself listening for an inner voice to speak, watching for some small sign or gesture that was not his own. The horror of the ordeal in the place of the wise ones had left its mark. He knew now, and knowing, he could never for one moment forget. It was not fear of death that oppressed him, though he was human and did not want to die. It was a dread of living again through that moment when he had ceased to be himself, when his mind and body were possessed in every cell by the invader. Worse than the dread of madness was the uncanny fear of Rhiannon's domination. Amer came again and again to talk with him and study him. He knew she was watching him for signs of Rhiannon's resurgence. But as long as she smiled, he knew that he was safe. She would not look into his mind again, but she referred once to what she had seen there. "You come from another world," she said with quiet sureness. "I think I knew that when I first saw you. The memories of it were in your mind, a desolate, desert place, very strange and sad." They were on his tiny balcony, high under the crest of the rock, and the wind blew clean and strong down from the green forests. Carse nodded. A bitter world, but it had its own beauty. "There is beauty even in death," said Amer. "But I am glad to be alive." "Let's forget that other place, then. Tell me of this one that lives so strongly. Rold said you were much with the halflings." She laughed. "He chides me sometimes, saying that I am a changeling and not human at all." "You don't look human now," Carse told her, "with the moonlight on your face and your hair all tangled with it." "Sometimes I wish it were true. You have never been to the Isles of the Skyfolk?" "No." "They're like castles rising from the sea, almost as tall as Condor. When the Skyfolk take me there, I feel the lack of wings, for I must be carried or remain on the ground while they soar and swoop around me. It seems to me then that flying is the most beautiful thing in the world, and I weep because I can never know it. But when I go with the swimmers, I am happier. My body is much like theirs, though never quite so fleet. And it is wonderful, oh wonderful, to plunge down into the glowing water and see the gardens that they keep, with the strange sea flowers bowing to the tide and the little bright fish darting like birds among them. And their cities, silver bubbles in the shallow ocean. The heavens there are all glowing fire, bright gold when the sun shines, silver at night. It is always warm, and the air is still, and there are little ponds where the babies play, learning to be strong for the open sea. I have learned much from the halflings, she finished. But the Duvians are halflings too, Kars said. Amer shivered. The Duvians are the oldest of the halfling races. There are but few of them now, and those all dwell at Caer-Du. Kars asked suddenly, You have halfling wisdom. Is there no way to be rid of the monstrous thing within me? She answered somberly, Not even the wise ones have learned that much. The Earthman's fists closed savagely on the rock of the gallery. It would have been better if you'd killed me there in the cave. Amer put her gentle hand on his and said, There is always time for death. After she left him, Kars paced the floor for hours, wanting the release of wine and not daring to take it, afraid to sleep. When exhaustion took him at last, his guards strapped him to his bed, and one stood by with a drawn sword and watched, ready to wake him instantly if he should seem to dream. And he did dream. Sometimes they were nothing more than nightmares born of his own anguish, and sometimes the dark whisper of an alien voice came gliding into his mind, saying, Do not be afraid. Let me speak, for I must tell you. Many times Kars awoke with the echo of his screaming in his ears, and the sword's point at his throat. I mean no harm or evil. I can stop your fears if you will only listen. Kars wondered which he would do first, go mad or fling himself from the balcony into the sea. Bagaz clung closer to him than ever. He seemed fascinated by the thing that lurked in Kars. He was awed, too, but not too much awed not to be furious over the disposal of the tomb. I told you to let me bargain for it, he would say. The greatest source of power on Mars, and you gave it away? Give it without even exacting a promise that they won't kill you when they get it. His fat hands made a gesture of finality. I repeat, you have robbed me, Kars. Robbed me of my kingdom. And Kars, for once, was glad of the Valkesians' effrontery, because it kept him from being alone. Bagaz would sit, drinking enormous quantities of wine, and every so often he would look at Kars and chuckle. People always said that I had a devil in me. But you, Kars, you have the devil in you. Let me speak, Kars, and I will make you understand. Kars grew gaunt and hollow-eyed. His face twitched and his hands were unsteady. Then the news came, brought by a winged man who flew exhausted into Condor. It was a mare who told Kars what had happened. She did not really need to. The moment he saw her face, white as death, he knew. Rold never reached the tomb, she said. A Sark patrol caught them on the outward voyage. They say Rold tried to slay himself to keep the secret safe, but he was prevented. They have taken him to Sark. But the Sarks don't even know that he has the secret, Kars protested, clutching at that straw, and Amer shook her head. They're not fools. They'll want to know the plans of Condor and why he was bound toward Jakara with a single ship. They'll have the Duvians question him. Kars realized sickly what that meant. The Duvians' hypnotic science had almost conquered his own stubbornly alien brain. It would soon suck all Rold's secrets out of him. Then there is no hope? No hope, said Amer. Not now, nor ever again. They were silent for a while. The wind moaned in the gallery, and the waves rolled in solemn thunder against the cliffs below. Kars said, "What will be done now?" "The Sea Kings have sent word through all the free coasts and isles. Every ship and every man is gathering here now, and Ironbeard will lead them on to Sark. There is little time. Even when the Duvians have the secret, it will take them time to go to the tomb and bring the weapons back and learn their use. If we can crush Sark before then—" "Can you crush Sark?" asked Kars. She answered honestly, "No. The Duvians will intervene, and even the weapons they already have will turn the scale against us. But we must try and die trying, for it will be a better death than the one that will come after, when Sark and the serpent level Condor into the sea." He stood looking down at her, and it seemed to him that no moment of his life had been more bitter than this. "Will the Sea Kings take me with them?" Stupid question. He knew the answer before she gave it to him. "They are saying now that this was all a trick of Rhiannon's, misleading Rold to get the secret into Caer-Du. I have told them it was not so, but—" She made a small, tired gesture and turned her head away. "Ironbeard, I think, believes me. He will see that your death is swift and clean." After a while, Kars said, "And Owain?" "Thorn of Tarak has arranged that. Her they will take with them to Sark, lashed to the bow of the leader's ship." There was another silence. It seemed to Kars that the very air was heavy, so that it weighed upon his heart. He found that a mare had left silently. He turned and went out onto the little gallery, where he stood staring down at the sea. "Rhiannon," he whispered, "I curse you. I curse the night I saw your sword, and I curse the day I came to Condor with the promise of your tomb." The light was fading. The sea was like a bath of blood in the sunlight. The wind brought him broken shouts and cries from the city, and far below, longships raced into the fjord. Kars laughed mirthlessly. "You've got what you wanted," he told the presence within him. "But you won't enjoy it long." Small triumph. The strain of the past few days and this final shock were too much for any man to take. Kars sat down on the carven bench and put his head between his hands, and stayed that way, too weary even for emotion. The voice of the dark invader whispered in his brain, and for the first time, Kars was too numb to fight it down. "I might have saved you this, if you had listened. Fools and children, all of you, that you would not listen." "Very well, then. Speak," Kars muttered heavily. "The evil is done now, and Ironbeard will be here soon. I give you leave, Rhiannon. Speak." And he did, flooding Kars's mind with a voice of thought, raging like a storm wind trapped in a narrow vault, desperate, pleading. "If you'll trust me, Kars, I could still save Condor. Lend me your body. Let me use it. I'm not far gone enough for that, even now." "Gods above!" Rhiannon's thought raged. "And there's so little time." Kars could sense how he fought to master his fury, and when the thought voice came again, it was controlled and quiet with a terrible sincerity. "I told you the truth in the grotto. You are in my tomb, Kars. How long do you think I could lie there alone in the dreadful darkness outside space and time and not be changed? I'm no god. Whatever you may call us now, we Quiru were never gods. only a race of men who came before the other men. They call me evil, the cursed one, but I was not. Vain and proud, yes, and a fool, but not wicked in intent. I taught the serpent folk, because they were clever and flattered me, and when they used my teaching to work evil, I tried to stop them and failed, because they had learned offenses from me, and even my power could not reach them in care due. Therefore, my brother Quiru judged me. They condemned me to remain imprisoned beyond space and time, in the place which they prepared, as long as the fruits of my sin endured on this world. Then they left me. We were the last of our race. There was nothing to hold them here, nothing they could do. They wanted only peace and learning. So they went along the path they had chosen. And I waited. Can you think what that waiting must have been? I think you deserved it, Carr said thickly. He was suddenly tense. The shadow, the beginning of a hope. Rhiannon went on. I did. But you gave me the chance to undo my sin, to be free to follow my brothers. The thought voice rose with a passion that was strong, dangerously strong. Lend me your body, Cos. Lend me your body, that I may do it. No, cried Kars. No! He sprang up, conscious now of his peril, fighting with all his strength against that wild, demanding force. He thrust it back, closing his mind against it. You cannot master me, he whispered. You cannot. No, sighed Rhiannon bitterly. I cannot. And the inner voice was gone. Kars leaned against the rock, sweating and shaken, but fired by a last desperate hope. No more than an idea, really, but enough to spur him on. Better anything than this waiting for death, like a mouse in a trap. If the god of chance would only give him a little time. From inside, he heard the opening of the door and the challenge of the guards, and his heart sank. He stood breathless, listening for the voice of Ironbeard. 14. Daring Deception. But it was not Ironbeard who spoke. It was Bagaz. It was Bagaz alone who came out onto the balcony, very downcast and sad. The mare sent me, he said. She told me the tragic news, and I had to come and say goodbye. He took Kars's hand. The Sea Kings are holding their last council of war before starting for Sark, but it will not be long. Old friend, we have been through much together. You have grown to be like my own brother, and this parting wrings my heart. The fat Valkesian seemed genuinely affected. There were tears in his eyes as he looked at Kars. Yes, like my own brother, he repeated unsteadily. Like brothers, who have quarreled, but we have shed blood together too. A man does not forget. He drew a long sigh. I should like to have something of yours to keep by me, friend. Some small trinket for memory's sake. Your jeweled collar, perhaps? Your belt? You will not miss them now, and I should cherish them all the days of my life. He wiped a tear away, and Kars took him not too gently by the throat. You hypocritical scoundrel! He snarled into the Valkesian's startled ear. A small trinket, eh? By the gods, for a moment you had me fooled. But my friend, squeaked Bagaz. Kars shook him once and let him go. In a rapid undertone he said, I'm not going to break your heart yet, if I can help it. Listen, Bagaz. How would you like to gain back the power of the tomb? Bagaz's mouth fell open.
"Mad," he whispered. "The poor fellow's lost his wits from shock."
Karst glanced inside. The guards were lounging out of earshot. They had no reason to care what went on in the balcony. There were 3 of them, mailed and armed. Bagaz was weaponless, as a matter of course, and Karst could not possibly escape unless he grew wings. Swiftly, the Earthman spoke.
"This venture of the Sea Kings is hopeless. The Duvians will help Sark, and Condor will be doomed. And that means you too, Bagaz. The Sarks will come, and if you survive their attack, which is doubtful, they'll flay you alive and give what's left of you to the Duvians."
Bagaz thought about that, and it was not a pleasant thought.
"But," he stammered, "to regain Rhiannon's weapons now, it's impossible. Even if you could escape from here, no man alive could get into Sark and snatch them from under Garroch's nose."
"No man," said Karst. "But I'm not just a man, remember? And whose weapons were they to begin with?" Realization began to dawn in the Valkesian's eyes. A great light broke over his moon face. He almost shouted and caught himself with Karst's hand already over his mouth.
"I salute you, Karst," he whispered. "The father of lies himself could not do better."
He was beside himself with ecstasy.
"It is sublime. It is worthy of Bagaz."
Then he sobered and shook his head.
"But it is also sheer insanity."
Karst took him by the shoulders, as it was before on the galley. "Nothing to lose, all to gain. Will you stand by me?" The Valkesian closed his eyes.
"I am tempted," he murmured. "As a craftsman, as an artist, I would like to see the flowering of this beautiful deceit."
He shivered all over.
"Flayed alive, you say? And then the Duvians? I suppose you're right. We're dead men, anyway."
His eyes popped open.
"Hold on there. For Rhiannon, all might be well in Sark, but I'm only Bagaz, who mutinied against Duane. Oh, no, I'm better off in Condor."
"Stay, then, if you think so." Karst shook him. "You fat fool. I'll protect you. As Rhiannon, I can do that. And as the saviors of Condor, with those weapons in our hands, there's no end to what we can do. How would you like to be king of Valkis?"
"Well,"
Bagaz sighed,
"you would tempt the devil himself. And speaking of devils—"
He looked narrowly at Karst.
"Can you keep yours down? It's an uncanny thing to have a demon for a bunkmate."
Karst said, "I can keep him down. You heard Rhiannon himself admit it."
"Then," said Bagaz, "we'd best move quickly before the Sea Kings end their council."
He chuckled.
"Old Ironbeard has helped us, ironically enough. Every man is ordered to duty, and our crew is aboard the galley, waiting, and not very happy about it either."
A moment later, the guards in the inner room heard a piercing cry from Bagaz.
"Help! Come quickly! Karst has thrown himself into the sea!"
They rushed onto the balcony, where Bagaz was leaning out, pointing down to the churning waves below.
"I tried to hold him," he wailed, "but I could not."
One of the guards grunted. "Small loss," he said, and then Karst stepped out of the shadows against the wall and struck him with a sledgehammer blow that felled him, and Bagaz whirled around to lay a second man on his back. The third one they knocked down between them before he could get his sword clear of the scabbard. The other 2 were climbing to their feet again with some idea of going on with the fight, but Karst and the Valkesian had no time to waste, and knew it. Fists hammered stunning blows with brutal accuracy, and within a few minutes the 3 unconscious men were safely bound and gagged. Kar started to take the sword from one of them, and Bagaz coughed with some embarrassment.
"Perhaps you'll want your own blade back," he said.
"Where is it?"
"Fortunately, just outside, where they made me leave it."
Kars nodded. It would be good to have the sword of Rhiannon in his hands again. Crossing the room, Kars stopped long enough to pick up a cloak belonging to one of the guards. He looked sidelong at Bagaz. "How did you so fortunately chance to have my sword?" he asked.
"Why, being your best friend and second in command, I claimed it."
The Valkesian smiled tenderly.
"You were about to die, and I knew you would want me to have it."
"Bagaz," said Kars, "your love for me is a beautiful thing."
"I have always been sentimental by nature."
The Valkesian motioned him aside, at the door.
"Let me go first."
He stepped out in the corridor, then nodded, and Kars followed him. The long blade stood against the wall. He picked it up and smiled.
"From now on," he said, "remember, I am Rhiannon."
There was little traffic in this part of the palace. The halls were dark, lighted at infrequent intervals by torches. Bagaz chuckled.
"I know my way around this place," he said. "In fact, I have found ways in and out that even the Khans have forgotten."
"Good," said Kars. "You lead, then. We go first to find Owain."
"Owain?"
Bagaz stared at him.
"Are you crazy, Kars? This is no time to be toying with that vixen."
Kars snarled. "She must be with us to bear witness in Sark that I am Rhiannon. Otherwise, the whole scheme will fall. Now will you go?" He had realized that Owain was the keystone of his whole desperate gamble. His trump card was the fact that she had seen Rhiannon possess him.
"There is truth in what you say,"
Bagaz admitted, then added dismally,
"but I like it not. First, a devil, then a hellcat with poison on her claws. This is surely a voyage for madmen."
Owain was imprisoned on the same upper level. Bagaz led the way swiftly, and they met no one. Presently, around the bend where two corridors met, Kars saw a single torch burning by a barred door that had one small opening in its upper half. A sleepy guard drowsed there over his spear. Bagaz drew a long breath.
"Owain can convince the Sarks," he whispered. "But can you convince her?"
"I must," Kars answered grimly.
"Well, then, I wish us luck."
According to the plan they had made on the way, Bagaz sauntered ahead to talk to the guard, who was glad to have news of what was going on. Then, in the middle of a sentence, Bagaz allowed his voice to trail off. Open-mouthed, he stared over the guard's left shoulder. The startled man swung around. Kars came down the corridor. He strode as though he owned the world, the cloak thrown back from his shoulders, his tawny head erect, his eyes flashing. The wavering torchlight struck fire from his jewels, and the sword of Rhiannon was a shaft of wicked silver in his hand. He spoke in the ringing tones he remembered from the grotto.
"Down on your face, you scum of Condor, unless you wish to die."
The man stood transfixed, his spear half raised. Behind him, Bagaz uttered a frightened whimper.
"By the gods," he moaned, "the devil has possessed him again. It is Rhiannon broken free."
Very godlike in the brazen light, Kars raised the sword, not as a weapon, but as a talisman of power. He allowed himself to smile.
"So you know me. It is well."
He bent his gaze on the white-faced guard.
"Do you doubt that I must teach you?" "No," the guard answered hoarsely. "No, Lord."
He went to his knees. The spear point clashed on rock as he dropped it. Then he bellied down and hid his face in his hands. Bagaz whimpered again.
Lord Rhiannon. Bind him, said Kars, and open me this door.
It was done. Bagaz lifted the 3 heavy bars from their sockets. The door swung inward, and Kars stood upon the threshold. She was waiting, standing tensely erect in the gloom. They had not given her so much as a candle, and the tiny cell was closed except for the barred slot in the door. The air was stale and dank, with a taint of moldy straw from the pallet that was the only furniture. And she wore her fetters still. Kars steeled himself. He wondered whether, in the hidden depths of his mind, the Cursed One watched. Almost, he thought, he heard the echo of dark laughter, mocking the man who played at being a god. Owain said,
Are you indeed Rhiannon? Martial, the deep, proud voice, the look of brooding fire in the glance. You have known me before, said Kars. How say you now?
He waited, while her eyes searched him in the half-light. And then slowly her head bent, stiffly, as became Owain of Sark, even before Rhiannon.
Lord, she said.
Kars laughed softly, and turned to the cringing Bagaz.
Wrap her in the cloths from the pallet. You must carry her, and bear her gently, swine.
Bagaz scurried to obey. Owain was obviously furious at the indignity, but she held her tongue on that score.
We are escaping them? She asked. We are leaving Condor to its fate.
Kars gripped the sword.
I would be in Sark when the Sea Kings come, that I may blast them myself, with my own weapons.
Bagaz covered her face with the rags. Her hauberk and the hampering chains were hidden. The Valkesian lifted what might have been only a dirty bundle to his massive shoulder, and over the bundle he gave Kars a beaming wink. Kars himself was not so sure. In this moment, grasping at the chance for freedom, Owain would not be too critical. But it was a long way to Sark. Had he detected in her manner just the faintest note of mockery when she bent her head? 15. Under the 2 Moons. Bagaz, with the true instinct of his breed, had learned every rat-hole in Condor. He took them out of the palace by a way so long disused that the dust lay inches thick and the postern door had almost rotted away. Then, by crumbling stairways and steep alleys that were no more than cracks in the rock, he led the way around the city. Condor seethed. The night wind carried echoes of hastening feet and taut voices. The upper air was full of beating wings, where the sky folk went, dark against the stars. There was no panic, but Kars could feel the anger of the city, and the hard, grim tension of a people about to strike back against certain doom. From the distant temple, he could hear the voices of women chanting to the gods. The hurrying people they met paid them little heed. It was only a fat sailor with a bundle and a tall man muffled in a cloak going down toward the harbor. What matter for notice in that? They climbed the long, long steps downward to the basin, and there was much coming and going on the dizzy way, but still they passed unchallenged. Each Khand was too full of his own worries this fateful night to pay attention to his neighbor. Nevertheless, Kars's heart was pounding, and his ears ached from listening for the alarm which would surely come as soon as Ironbeard went up to slay his captive. They gained the quays. Kars saw the tall mast of the galley towering above the longships, and made for it with Bagaz panting at his heels. Torches burned here by the hundreds. By their light, fighting men and supplies were pouring aboard the longships. The rock walls rang with a tumult. Small craft darted between the outer moorings. Kars kept his head lowered, shouldering his way through the crowd. The water was alive with swimmers, and there were women with set white faces who had come to bid their men farewell. As they neared the galley, Kars let Bagaz get ahead of him. He paused in the shelter of a pile of casks, pretending to bind up his sandal thong while the Valkesian went aboard with his burden. He heard the crew, sullen-faced and nervous, hailing Bagaz and asking for news. Bagaz disposed of Owain by dumping her casually in the cabin, and then called all hands forward for a conference by the wine butt, which was locked in the lazarette there. The Valkesian had his speech by heart.
"News?"
Kars heard him say.
"I'll give you news. Since Rold was taken, there's an ugly temper in the city. We were there, brothers, yesterday. Today, we're outlaws and enemies again. I've heard them talking in the wine shops, and I tell you, our lives aren't worth that." While the crew was muttering uneasily over that, Kars darted over the side unseen. Before he gained the cabin, he heard Bagaz finish. "There was a mob already gathering when I left. If we want to save our hides, we'd better cast off now, while we have the chance." Kars had been pretty sure what the reaction of the crew would be to that story, and he was not sure at all that Bagaz was stretching it too much. He had seen mobs turn before, and his crew of convict Sarks, Jacarans, and others might soon be in a nasty spot. Now, with the cabin door closed and barred, he leaned against the panel, listening. He heard the padding of bare feet on the deck, the quick shouting of orders, the rattle of the blocks as the sails came down from the yards. The mooring lines were cast off. The sweeps came out with a ragged rumble. The gallery rode free. "Ironbeard's orders!"
Bagaz shouted to someone on shore.
"A mission for Condor!"
The galley quivered, then began to gather way with a measured booming of the drum. And then, over all the near confusion of sound, Kars heard what his ears had been straining to hear. The distant roar from the crest of the rock. The alarm sweeping through the city, rushing toward the harbor stair. He stood in an agony of fear, lest everyone else should hear it too, and know its meaning without being told. The din of the harbor covered it long enough, and by the time word had been brought down from the crest, the black galley was already in the roadstead, speeding down in the mouth of the fjord. In the darkness of the cabin, Owain spoke quietly.
"Lord Rhiannon, may I be allowed to breathe?"
He knelt and stripped the cloths from her, and she sat up.
"My thanks. Well, we are free of the palace and the harbor, but there still remains the fjord. I heard the outcry."
"Aye," said Kars, "and the sky folk will carry word ahead." He laughed. "Let us see if they can stop Rhiannon by flinging pebbles from the cliffs." He left her then, ordering her to remain where she was, and went out on deck. They were well along the channel now, racing under a fast stroke. The sails were beginning to catch the wind that blew between the cliffs. He tried to remember how the ballista defenses were set, counting on the fact that they were meant to bear on ships coming into the fjord, not going out. Speed would be the main thing. If they could drive the galley fast enough, they'd have a chance. In the faint light of Deimos, no one saw him. Not until Phobos topped the cliffs and sent a shaft of greenish light. Then the men saw him there, his cloak whipping in the wind, the long sword in his hands. A strange sort of cry went up, half welcome for the Kars they remembered, half fear because of what they had heard about him in Condor. He didn't give them time to think. Swinging the sword high, he roared at them.
"Pull there, you apes! Pull, or they'll sink us!"
Man or devil, they knew he spoke the truth. They pulled. Kars leaped up to the steersman's platform. Bagaz was already there. He cowered convincingly against the rail as Kars approached, but the man at the tiller regarded him with wolfish eyes in which there was an ugly spark. It was the man with a branded cheek who had been at the oar with Jaxart on the day of the mutiny. "I'm captain now,"
he said to Kars. I'll not have you on my ship to curse it. Kars said with terrible slowness, I see you do not know me. Tell him, man of Valkis. But there was no need for Bagaz to speak. There came a whistling of pinions down the wind, and a winged man swooped low in the moonlight over the ship. Turn back! Turn back! He cried. You bear Rhiannon! Aye, Kars shouted back. Rhiannon's wrath! Rhiannon's power! He lifted the sword hilt high, so that the dark jewel blazed evilly in Phobos's light. Will you stand against me? Will you dare? The sky man swerved away and rose wailing in the wind. Kars turned upon the steersman. And you, he said, how say you now? He saw the wolf eyes flicker from the blazing jewel to his own face and back again. The look of terror he was beginning to know too well came into them, and they dropped. I dare not stand against Rhiannon, the man said hoarsely. Give me the helm, said Kars, and the others stood aside, the brand showing livid on his whitened cheek. Make speed, Kars ordered, if you would live. And speed they made, so that the galley went with a frightening rush between the cliffs, a black and ghostly ship between the white flare of the fjord and the cold green moonlight. Kars saw the open sea ahead and steeled himself, praying. A whining snarl echoed from the rock as the first of the great ballistas crashed. A spout of water rose by the galley's bow, and she shuddered and raced on. Crouched over the tiller bar, his cloak streaming, his face intense and strange in the eerie glow, Kars ran the gauntlet in the throat of the fjord. Ballistas twanged and thundered. Great stones rained into the water, so that they sailed through a burning cloud of mist and spray. But it was as Kars had hoped. The defenses, invincible to frontal attack, were weak when taken in reverse. The bracketing of the channel was imperfect, the aim poor against a fleeing target. Those things and the headlong speed of the galley saved them. They came out into open water. The last stone fell far astern, and they were free. There would be quick pursuit, that he knew, but for the moment they were safe. Kars realized then the difficulties of being a god. He wanted to sit down on the deck and take a long pull at the wine cask to get over his shakes. But instead, he had to force a ringing laugh, as though it amused him to see these childish humans try to prevail against the invincible. Here, you who call yourself captain, take the helm and set a course for Sark. Sark! The unlucky man had much to contend with that night. My lord Rhiannon, have pity. We are prescribed convicts in Sark. Rhiannon will protect you, Bagaz said. Silence, roared Kars. Who are you to speak for Rhiannon? Bagaz cringed abjectedly, and Kars said, Fetch the Lady Owain to me, but first strike off her chains. He descended the ladder to stand upon the deck, waiting. Behind him he heard the branded man groan and mutter, Owain, gods above, the cons would have been a better death. Kars stood unmoving, and the men watched him, not daring to speak, wanting to rise and kill him, but afraid. Afraid of the unknown, shivering at the power of the cursed one that could blast them all. Owain came to him, free of her chains now, and bowed. He turned and called out to the crew. You rose against her once, following the barbarian. Now the barbarian is no more as you knew him, and you will serve Owain again. Serve her well, and she will forget your crime. He saw her eyes blaze at that. She started to protest,
and he gave her a look that stopped the words in her throat.
"Pledge them," he commanded, "on the honor of Sark."
She obeyed, but it seemed to Karst again that she was still not quite convinced that he was actually Rhiannon. She followed him to the cabin and asked if she might enter. He gave her leave and sent Bagaz after wine, and then for a time there was silence. Karst sat brooding in Owain's chair, trying to still the nervous pounding of his heart, and she watched him from under lowered eyes. The wine was brought. Bagaz hesitated, and then perforce left them alone.
"Sit down," said Karst, "and drink."
Owain pulled up a low stool and sat with her long legs thrust out before her, slender as a boy in her black mail. She drank and said nothing. Karst said abruptly,
"You doubt me still?"
She started.
"No, Lord."
Karst laughed.
"Don't think to lie to me. A stiff-necked, haughty wench you are, Owain, and clever. An excellent prince for Sark, despite your sex."
Her mouth twisted rather bitterly.
"My father Gareth fashioned me as I am, a weakling with no son. Someone had to carry the sword, while he toyed with the scepter."
"I think," said Karst, "that you have not altogether hated it." She smiled.
"No, I was never bred for silken cushions."
She continued suddenly,
"But let us have no more talk of my doubting, Lord Rhiannon. I have known you before, once in this cabin when you faced Sasan, and again in the place of the wise ones. I know you now."
"It does not greatly matter whether you doubt or not, Owain. The barbarian alone overcame you, and I think Rhiannon would have no trouble." She flushed an angry red. Her lingering suspicion of him was plain now. Her anger with him betrayed it.
"The barbarian did not overcome me. He kissed me, and I let him enjoy that kiss, so that I could leave a mark of it on his face forever."
Karst nodded, goading her.
"And for a moment, you enjoyed it also. You're a woman, Owain, for all your short tunic and your mail, and a woman always knows the one man who can master her." "You think so?" she whispered.
She had come close to him now, her red lips parted as they had been before, tempting, deliberately provocative.
"I know it," he said. "If you were merely the barbarian and nothing else," she murmured, "I might know it also."
The trap was almost undisguised. Karst waited until the tense silence had gone flat. Then he said coldly,
"Very likely you would.
However, I am not the barbarian now, but Rhiannon, and it is time you slept." He watched her with grim amusement as she drew away, disconcerted and perhaps for the first time in her life completely at a loss. He knew that he had dispelled her lingering doubt about him for the time being at least. He said, "You may have the inner cabin."
"Yes, Lord,"
she answered, and now there was no mockery in her tone. She turned and crossed the cabin slowly. She pushed open the inner door and then halted, her hand on the doorpost, and he saw an expression of loathing come into her face.
"Why do you hesitate?" he asked.
"The place still reeks of the serpent taint," she said. "I'd rather sleep on deck."
"Those are strange words, Owain. Sasan was your counselor, your friend. I was forced to slay him to save the barbarian's life. But surely Owain of Sark has no dislike of her allies." "Not my allies, Gareth's."
She turned and faced him, and he saw that her anger over her discomfiture had made her forget caution.
"Rhiannon or no Rhiannon," she cried, "I will say what has been in my mind to say all these years. I hate your crawling pupils of care-do. I loathe them utterly. And now you may slay me if you will."
And she strode out onto the deck, letting the door slam shut behind her. Carr sat still behind the table. He was trembling all over with nervous strain, and presently he would pour wine to aid him. But just now he was amazed to find how happy it could make him to know that Owain, too, hated care-do. The wind had dropped by midnight, and for hours the galley forged on under oars, moving at far less than her normal speed, because they were short-handed in the rowers' pit, having lost the cons that made up the full number. And at dawn, the lookout sighted 4 tiny specks on the horizon that were the hulls of longships, coming on from Condor.